Just one small rock moves, and the chain reaction of what follows can be devastating, even deadly. Now, when we think of the most dangerous mountains to climb, there's probably a list that automatically pops into our mind, and at the top of that list is likely a mountain like Everest. And Mount Everest certainly is a dangerous mountain that has taken the lives of many because of things like low oxygen levels, extreme temperature shifts, dangerous ice. But Mount Everest is not the most dangerous mountain to climb. In fact, the most dangerous mountain to climb is a mountain called Mont Blanc. And it stands on the border between Italy and France. Interesting things about Mont Blanc is this. It's only half as high as Mount Everest. Low oxygen levels, extreme temperature shifts, dangerous ice are not hazards you have to worry about on Mont Blanc. And while there are certainly hazards to fear, it's the most dangerous mountain to climb. One of the most dangerous are the rock falls that occur. In one point on the climb, a point called the Grand Couloir, rock falls are so prevalent there that people have nicknamed that gully the Death Gully. One small rock moves, and the chain reaction of what follows can be devastating, even deadly. So climbers are warned about this. They're aware of this, and they look out. Now, I don't think anybody here this morning, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think anybody here this morning has had to literally duck and cover from a rock fall. But I am here this morning to give fair warning about one small rock in our life that, if moved, can cause a similar chain reaction of devastation and negative consequences. And that small rock is this: excusing error. Excusing error. The one small rock we have to be extremely aware of today is the one in which we justify wrongdoing, the one in which we excuse sinful behavior, and we push it aside as no big deal. That is the one small rock that we must be weary of today. And there's a lot of ways that we pull that rock. There's a lot of ways that we step on that rock for that rock fall to occur. And perhaps there are some of us this morning who have even walked into church today with that one small rock in their hand. So I'm here to warn you. I'm here to make you aware. I'm hopeful that we will look out, because that never ends well. And it didn't in the book of Genesis in chapter 34. Let's turn to that passage today. That's the text that we're in, Genesis chapter 34. I'd like to invite you to open your Bibles to follow along this narrative story with us. There's a Bible in the chair in front of you if you want to pick that up and follow on the screen. Let's stand together. I'm not going to read the whole section because we're reading chapter 34, right into chapter 35, verse 4. So I'm just going to pick up a couple things to start, and then we'll get looking at this. Genesis 34, verse 1 to 6 to start. Now Dinah, the daughter Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of the area, saw her, he took her and raped her. His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Get me this girl as my wife." When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock, so he did nothing about it until they came home. Hop over to chapter 35. We're just going to get the bookends of this morning. Chapter 35, verse 1 to 4. Then God said to Jacob, "Go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, Get rid of the foreign gods you have with you and purify yourselves and change your clothes. Then come, let's go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God who answered me in the day of my distress and who has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had and the rings in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the oak of Shechem. Then they set out, and the terror of God fell on the towns all around them, so that no one pursued. You can be seated. This is our story today. This is a story that begins with an extreme violation of an individual. Because something God created beautiful for intimacy that was meant to be experienced and is still meant to be experienced within that loving and protective covenant of marriage is smashed and humiliated. It's ugly. It's ugly what happens in the first part of this story. And while the lines of sex, at least in our culture, have been skewed and twisted to allow for a lot of practices, most people would still agree that rape is wrong. I mean, God draws his lines really, really wide. And while the culture has narrowed those lines, tried to twist and turn those lines, still, the majority of the culture would still believe rape is wrong. When the self-centered perversion of one forces themselves upon and violates the purity of another. That's what happens in verse 1 and 2. Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, is raped by Shechem, the son of Hamor. That is wrong. That's a sinful thing with no excuse, so I'm sure no one is going to excuse that. No one would excuse such an error. Or would they? Look at verse 5 of chapter 34. When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock, so he did nothing about it until they came home. Now, most commentators would believe that the only reason he did anything at all was because his sons came home. Basically, Jacob looks at what happened and he basically says, let's just not rock the boat. Let's just not rock the boat. And the question is, Jacob, this is your daughter. How could you stand back and do nothing? See, his excusing error is seen in how he justifies his own passivity. That's one way we excuse error. We justify our own passivity towards it. Now look at verse 1. It says this, Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, had born to Jacob. Okay, that Leah had born to Jacob. Now, Jacob obviously has reasons for his passivity. They're not good ones. They're not good reasons. But he has his reasons to try to justify his passivity. And one of them might just be because of who this is. This is Dinah, the daughter of Leah. Okay, maybe you remember the story of Leah. Leah, Jacob married Leah only because he was tricked into marrying her. See, he didn't want Leah. That's not the woman that he wanted. His heart was thumping for Rachel. And eventually he would marry Rachel too. So it might just be that he really wasn't all that concerned with this part of his family. And in fact, that would be confirmed in chapter 33, our story last week. When Jacob comes home to meet his brother and he thinks he's going to be killed, he protects his family. He gets the slaves at the front, Leah in the middle, and his very most precious to him, Rachel and Joseph in the back, where they're going to be safe and protected. So it might just be that Jacob is thinking he's not all that concerned with this part of his family. Not as much as it would have been another. But maybe there's more. Look at chapter 33, verse 19. Just jump down. For 100 pieces of silver, he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. Jacob just had done business with this family. I mean, after 20 years of moving away and walking away from the land God had promised him, it was from this family that when he came back to the land God had promised him, that he had bought his first plot of land. I mean, Jacob had done business with this family. So he might just be thinking, hey, I'm just finally getting back. I mean, things are better than I thought they'd be with my brother. Let's just not cause any unpeaceful things here. Let's just not rock the boat. See, perhaps in his mind he made excuses like, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe an excuse like, hey, I'm just trying to be a good neighbor. I'm just trying to be a kind neighbor. I'm just going to be patient. I'm just going to be long-suffering in this one. His let's just not was anything but just. And when we do that, ours are too. And we do no one any justice. We do no one any justice when we refuse to point out error and call people to account because we're afraid of whatever backlash is going to come our way. See, sitting on the sidelines doesn't guarantee that you're not going to get rolled over with those consequences. And in fact, sometimes sitting on the sideline will guarantee that you do. Now, there's a way to call people to err. There's a way to do that. There's a proper way to do that. In Ephesians 4:15, it says, now speak the truth in love. Whatever we say, whatever tough thing we have to say, it has to be done in love. Jesus Christ was even described as being a man full of truth and grace. You see, there's a way that we can proclaim these things in a way that is loving and graceful. And those things should start with the ones that you do love. Parents, point out error in the life of your kids. Okay, point out error. Don't be passive and try to justify excuses for why boys will be boys or she'll get over this one. Parents, call out the error of your children. Within a marriage, there should be enough love and communication there that you can point out things in one another's life that might not be quite correct. You should be able to have these conversations that will build each other up and not destroy them. Within families, I mean, every family has their stories, right? And that's the toughest place often, but sometimes we just have to call out what is happening that is wrong. And yes, there are those times when in our culture, we graciously, with love, have to do the same thing. Jacob didn't do it. And his sons called him on it. Look at verse 31 of chapter 34. After Jacob talks to his sons, they say this, but they replied, should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? And they're saying, Dad, you've done nothing here. We're supposed to just let this happen? You're going to let this happen to your own daughter? They're accusing Dad of really being their sister's pimp. How are you going to allow this to happen? We excuse error when we justify our own passivity. Jacob did. And there's other ways that we excuse error. Look at Shechem's response. Okay, he's the guy. He's the guy. Look at verse 2 and 3. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of the area, saw her, he took her and raped her. Verse 3, his heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. Verse 4, and Shechem said to his father Hamor, get me the girl as my wife. How does Shechem respond to his own outrageous act? He basically says this, hey, it's just not what you think. It's just not what you think. No, you have it all wrong. You have it all wrong. This isn't rape. Everyone's mistaken here. See, we can see his excusing error in the fact that he justifies it. We excuse error when we justify the pleasure. What does he say in verse 3? No, I love her. I love her. She's going to be my wife. So let me show you. I will show you that this is not really what it looks like. This is not really how it sounds. Look at verse 8. But Hamor said to them, my son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us. The land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it. Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, this is what he says, let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Okay, look it. This is not what you think. I'm going to prove this to you right now. Verse 12. Make the price. Make the price for the bride, and the gift I am to bring as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever you ask. Only give me the girl as my wife. Shechem is quite prepared to pay. But nowhere in there is he prepared to pay for his guilt. He's not prepared to pay for what he's done. He's only prepared to pay for his pleasure. And he thinks he's going to be able to do it by making the brothers believe that this is not really the kind of guy he is. It's just not what you think. It's just not what you think. And in his mind, he made excuses to justify that. That sounded like, no, this isn't lust, it's love. This isn't some sort of divisive act. This is going to bring us all together. We're going to share and trade and live in the land together. In his mind, he may have even made excuses that sounded like this. Now, they're not in the text. We can maybe imply some things because we might say this about our pleasures. He might have said things like, hey, it's not just my fault. The way she looked at me. I'm not the only one to blame. He may have even said, I deserve it. Or it's not as bad as you think. It's not really that bad. In his mind, he justified it. But his it's just not was anything but just. His it's just not was anything but just. And in fact, he does it again. This is an excuse he likes. Because in verse 21 to 23, after hearing from Jacob and the brothers what the deal is going to be, he goes to the men of the town and he says this. In verse 21, these men are friendly toward us, they said. Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters and they can marry ours. But the men will agree to live with us as our people only on the condition that our males be circumcised as they themselves are. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours? So let us agree to their terms, and they will settle among us. You know what's interesting about what they say? It's not what the deal was. They made it sound a little bit better. I mean, look at that question in verse 23. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours? That's not what the deal was. The deal was that they were going to share and trade and be together. It's just not what you think. His is just not was anything but just. You know who we hear quite often more than anybody? The it's just not what you think argument from? Addicts. People who are addicted to pleasure. See, we often hear that justification from addicts. People who have been gripped by a pleasure, now way out of control, but they refuse to acknowledge it. And so we might think, oh, good, because I'm not addicted to substance. That's not my problem. But pleasure might be. We can be addicted to pleasure in other ways. We can find our excuses just like them. Maybe you're addicted to sex. Maybe you're addicted to pornography. That's the pleasure you can't get enough of. You're addicted to that now. And you might just say, oh, no, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. Maybe you're addicted to having something like a critical spirit, where you maybe take pleasure in criticizing people. It maybe makes you feel good about yourself. Oh, no. I love them. I just want what's best. Or maybe your pleasure is the fact that your ego and your pride is so high that you have an ungrateful heart or a loose tongue, or you take what's not yours. It's just not what you think. No, it is. It is. It's exactly what we think. It's exactly what we think. And that's exactly where Jacob's sons were. You messed with the wrong sister. That's what they're thinking. You messed with the wrong little sister. Look out. Look out. Look at verse 6. Then Shechem's father Hamor went out to talk with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the fields. As soon as they heard what had happened, they were shocked and furious because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, a thing that should not be done. Look out. This is personal. Man, you messed with the wrong sister, because now the boys are out for blood. Vitor Belfort, I don't know if you know that name, but he's a very famous mixed martial artist. Almost in his career. And if you go to the website, the testimonial site, I Am Second, ever seen that site? I Am Second, watch those testimonies. You actually see the testimony of Vitor Belfort on that site. And in his testimony, this Brazilian talks about what really shaped him to begin even wanting to pursue that type of career. And what it was back in Brazil, as a young teen, his sister was kidnapped and murdered. And it was at that time that the anger began to raise up. He began to have fury in his heart that he wanted to unleash. He had to unleash it. So anybody who wanted to fight him, he would just unleash this incredible fury upon them because of what happened to his little sister. That fury was really meant for those men that had touched her. But he couldn't get his hands on them yet. And before he came to faith in Christ, there was this incredible fury in him because someone messed with his sister. And it's often when someone close to us, it's often when they get hurt, that fury and revenge is what our sights are set on. Look at what the revenge is going to be. Verse 13 to 17. Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to them, "We can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll settle among you and become one people with you. But if you will not agree to be circumcised, we'll take our sister and go." Look at verse 24. All the men who went out of the city gate agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, yes, 3 days later, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. Jacob's brothers basically said this: it's not something to be ignored. That this is not going to be ignored. No way. This heir is not going to be ignored. We cannot ignore this. Now, our Father, he might be trying to smooth things over and trying to make things good with the land, but now is not the time for that. Now is the time to make Shechem pay. Oh, we're making Shechem pay, let's make his dad pay. Oh, we're making his dad pay, let's make everybody in that land pay. You know how their excusing error is seen? Their excusing error is seen in justifying a payback. That's another way that we excuse error. We justify our own payback. Now, they may have had things that they're saying in their mind. Things like, hey, what comes around goes around. Or maybe an excuse like, they're only going to get what they deserve. Or maybe an excuse like, hey, they started it. They started it. But there, it's just not, was anything but just. We justify a payback. Ours are too. When I was working at Youth for Christ, when I was beginning my ministry career after doing Western University, I was working at Youth for Christ, and there was a lot of training back in the day. We had to travel a lot and have these training things, know how to work with youth, high-risk youth, all those things. And we were at National Convention one year, and we were with all our friends from our certain chapters and whatnot, and we're in the hotel together. And I was rooming with my friend Jeff. And, of course, everyone's kind of in and out of the room because we're all this one big happy family. And then I went to the washroom. And after I was done using the bathroom, I turned around to flush the toilet. And I turned to do this, and all of a sudden when I flushed the toilet, I was getting like a fire hose drenched with water. And what had happened was one of those guys, someone that I thought was my brother, a friend of mine, snuck into my bathroom. And what he had done was he had popped the hose out of where it refills the tank, and he lifted the lid and kind of just squeezed it right there. So as soon as anyone was gonna flush the toilet, the water was going to come shooting right out at them. And you know what I wanted to do? Revenge. There's going to be payback for that. Payback. And often, payback is not fun. It's not the fun we had. It's not the innocent kind of just laughing together, joking around kind of a payback. Often the payback comes from a deep-seated grudge because of someone who has wronged you. And so your heart gets turned towards revenge. Now, justice is necessary. Don't hear that. Justice is necessary. And if there's something actually unjust that's been done to you, yeah, justice is necessary. But, we have laws for most of those things. And for the unjust things that we don't have laws for, God says this to us. In Romans 12, verse 19, God says this. Listen very carefully. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for the Lord's wrath. Because he says, I will avenge. I will repay. I will avenge. I will repay. But so often we just say, it's not going to be ignored. It's not going to be ignored. And we justify a payback. Now, there is something that shouldn't be ignored. And the thing that shouldn't be ignored is the one thing that so far in this story, everybody has missed. Jacob's missed it. The brothers have missed it. Shechem and the people in the land have missed it. All of them have missed it, and it's this. It's the whole truth. They've missed the whole truth. I mean, they've ignored parts of it. They're ignoring the whole truth. I mean, everyone kind of grabs what they want from it. But they're not seeing the whole truth. And all they need is the truth. And we just need the truth. And the truth is that when there's a situation like this, when there's a wrongdoing and we're excusing it, the first person we always have to look at is ourselves. We always have to look at ourselves first. Because it might be our own justifying our passivity, or justifying a pleasure, or justifying a payback. It might be our own thing, our own error, that is making those consequences mount and tear down and destroy. It might be us. So there's some things that we just can't do. We can't do. And the first thing is this: we cannot absolve our own error like Jacob tried to do. We cannot absolve it. There's consequences for that. Look at chapter 34, verse 30. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, those are the two brothers that did this deed, "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." Jacob tried to absolve his own mistake, to justify a passivity, and he still has consequences. And he knows it. He said, "Guys, what are you doing to me?" And it could have all been stopped if he had spoken into that air. See, we can't absolve our own error. Try to just push it to the side like Jacob did. And we also can't try to appease our own error. That's what Shechem tried to do. He just tried to appease everybody through it. Look at the consequences of that in verse 25 to 27. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. You know, Shechem just tried to appease his own error. Now look what happened. Look at those consequences. They weren't just his now. They were his dad's. They were his friends. They were his neighbors. Everybody in that land, because he tried to appease his own error. Justify it some way. Cannot absolve our own error. We cannot try to appease it when we make a mistake. We also cannot try to ignore it. That's what Jacob's two sons, Simeon and Levi, did. They were just ignorant of what they were doing. They didn't think it through. They were just hotheads living off their emotions. And they have consequences because of that. In Genesis chapter 49, verse 5, I do want to show this to you. So look at chapter 49, verse 5, a few pages over. When Jacob calls his sons around his bed to bless him, when his life is nearing its end, he calls all his sons, and listen to what he says to Simeon and Levi in verse 5 of chapter 49. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly, for they have killed men in their anger. and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. That's major consequences. Major consequences for these two boys who tried to be ignorant of their own mistakes. It all could have stopped. People had pointed to themselves, stopped excusing error and justifying wrong and whatever they have done. You know how it started? It started with one small rock that got pulled. And those rocks we often don't pay enough attention to. We're not aware of them. We're not mindful enough to notice they away. And in fact, we've looked at this whole passage, and we've even missed what the small rock was that started all of this. So much that's the case for us too. But the small rock was in verse 1 of chapter 34. Let me read that again, and then we'll just conclude. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, the daughter Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. Dinah, Jacob's daughter, went out to visit the women of the land. Doesn't sound like a big deal. Certainly a small thing. But it was that small rock that started all these consequences, because God had told his people, he had warned his people about the people of the land, about who their neighbors were going to be. And at that time, okay, this is a different time now than ours, but at that time, God had very clearly said to not join them, to not be with them, but to very clearly separate themselves from them. But there's Dinah. There's Dinah, that little daughter kind of tucked back in the back of the story, who ignored that truth, went and made friends, women of the land, visiting them. And that's when that small rock got pulled, for all the rockfall to crash down. Now, was Dinah to be blamed for what happened to her? No way. I'm not saying that. Dinah was in no way to be blamed for actually those things that happened to her. Those were somebody else's choices. But what we cannot ignore is that if Dinah had not ignored that truth, then the rockfall wouldn't have even began in the first place. One small rock, kind of tucked back, that we're not even mindful of, was that one heir that buried them. Now, eventually Jacob gets it. Look at chapter 35. Okay, Jacob gets it. And somewhere between 34 and 35, he just understands. He gets all this. And so God said to Jacob, "Go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." So look at what Jacob does. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Get rid of the foreign gods." You know where they would have got those from? Their neighbors. "Get rid of your foreign gods you have with you, and purify yourselves and change your clothes. Then come, let's go to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave Jacob all their foreign gods they had, and the rings in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the oak of Shechem. It was a funeral for all these things that were against the truth. And Jacob tells everybody, and now he's not trying to absolve any of his own heir. He's owning up and saying, "Family, it's time to get it right. Bring all these things, and we're going to bury them. We're going to have a massive funeral here. We're going to bury every falsehood in our life because we need to follow the God that we worship, full of truth. We need to follow his truth." Today, we just need the truth. And the truth for us is this: be warned. It just takes one small rock. That's it for this to happen. One small rock. It could be that one small rock in your personal life. It could be that one small rock at work. It could be that one small rock. Be warned. It just takes that. Second thing is this: be aware. Some of you have already stepped on it. You've already stepped on it. It's already shifted. And so be aware. Don't try to justify passivity. Get it right. Don't try to justify that pleasure and try to make excuses for why it's really not that bad. Don't try to justify a payback if that's the situation you're in. Don't try to justify. I mean, your hand's already on it, and you may have even walked in here with it. Okay, get it right. The third thing is this: look out. Know what God's truth says. Know what God's truth says. Know what He tells us to do in certain situations. Know how He tells us to live our lives. Because it's only in knowing the truth that we just need that will keep our foot from stepping on that rock and the rock fall of devastation and negative consequences to bury us. Look out. Know the truth. That's just what you need. Let's pray. God, today we thank you again for our time to meet you. This is a good reminder for us this morning, God, because there are those things in all of our lives that we know are questionable, that we know probably aren't going to lead to good things, that we know are wrong. And yet for all of us, there is probably that one thing, maybe even two, that we try to just justify, make excuses for. God, we probably all have that one thing. So the warning's been good today to keep our hands off it, because we need to be aware, God, that the consequences are going to come. I mean, this never ends well. And there's some of my brothers and sisters today who have already stepped on that rock, and the rock fall is already beginning. And so my prayer for them is that they wouldn't absolve their error. I've done nothing here. That they wouldn't try to appease their error and try to just make it better and maybe try to divert some of the downfall, and that they wouldn't try to be ignorant of their actions. But they would just come to you like Jacob did and say, man, let's just bury all this now. Let's get it right. Let's bury all this stuff before we are. And that they would get it right. That they would bury those things. That the consequences would not be as drastic as they could potentially be. God, we need to know your truth. This is not something to be taken lightly, and certainly Jacob had to learn the hard ways as well as his family. The truth is so integral to them. There's a reason for why you gave it. There's a reason for why you've told us how we should live our life and what we should do in this area of our life, in that area of our life, in this area of our life. There's ways that you've directed us and guided us. Help us to have not just the smarts, but the heart to follow it. Knowing that you are a God that does not bury us, but you bring life. And so much could be avoided if we just follow you and your truth. We just need the truth. And I pray that we would continue to learn, study, and walk in it. We would stop ourselves now from being buried by dealing with these things right away. So I pray that we do that. I pray that we do that. God, I know some people have already suffered some consequences. It could even be up in their neck in it. God, as we follow you now, you're able to take those pieces away and you're able to bring us back to a place of security and stability. Even when things are still going to be a little bit tough. Okay, we get that. But there's stability when we stand on what you tell us to do and who you are. So I pray that we wouldn't just be okay with getting buried. But again, that we would now deal with those things. So God, our plea is that you would excuse our error. You are a forgiving God who forgives us. We're asking that today. And now the work for us is to go start to get things done the right way, to follow your truth. And as we leave, I pray that we would do that. And in your name, I pray all these things. Amen. Well, I pray that you've been blessed by being with us today. We're going to have some coffee time now, so if you want to hang around for a while and meet some faces and have some coffee, then you're more than welcome to do that. I'm going to remain at the front for just a couple of minutes, so if anyone wants to talk to me about things, they can come to the front, and then I can go to the back and we will have some conversation and time together. Have a great week. Always be grateful because of who Christ is, and Lord willing, we'll be back next week to follow up on chapter 35.